This animation illustrates the intention-behavior gap. A system possesses a clear target, initiates movement toward it, and then diverges from its own defined path. A person knows what they need to do, yet executes the opposite action. Standard psychology often proposes a singular bridge for this gap, executive function, commonly known as willpower. The assumption is that the system deviates because the conscious mind failed to exert enough force to maintain the trajectory. Operating under this model turns behavioral failure into a character flaw. When a system requires force to reach its target, missing the mark is interpreted as a lack of effort, a moral deficit rather than an operational error. Behavioral change requires a structural, cybernetic reorganization. When a system continually misses its target, the issue is often a miscalibration in how the system processes feedback and internal structure. If willpower is treated as the primary engine of change, we are misdiagnosing the mechanics of the human psyche. We are trying to push a system into alignment instead of repairing the navigation array itself. To map that navigation array, we rely on isomorphism, the principle that structural patterns, or the way parts relate to each other over time, persist across different fields of study without losing their shape. If a relational pattern is valid, it survives translation. The exact same architecture dictates a mechanical control loop, biological homeostasis, and human psychological habit. This stone bust depicts the philosopher Heraclitus. He identified this cross-domain pattern matching long before modern engineering, naming this underlying, repeating structural order the logos. Ancient spiritual texts, like the ones preserved on this papyrus, functioned as early system sciences. Lacking measurement instruments, thinkers used structured observation of experience to map the internal dynamics of the psyche. Decoding these symbolic vocabularies through the framework of modern cybernetics provides a technical coordinate system for the psyche. It allows us to view ancient insights as a rigorous, mechanical blueprint for achieving behavioral alignment. We have to strip away domain-specific jargon to see these underlying relationships clearly. This matrix places 3 distinct fields side by side to track a single behavioral sequence. In the first column, engineering requires a baseline condition, a set parameter the system aims to maintain, known as a reference point. In the second column, neuroscience maps the exact same concept. The brain establishes a predictive model of the environment, creating a cognitive expectation. In the third column, spiritual traditions describe an oriented target for human behavior, referring to this baseline as the mark. The terminology changes, but the relational mechanics behave identically across all 3 domains. The reference point, the expectation, and the mark are the same structural component. When a pattern holds steady across the design of a machine, the biology of a brain, and the theology of an ancient text, it suggests the presence of a recurring organization that persists regardless of the medium. Removing the culturally entrenched moral baggage from the concept of sin allows for a technical assessment of why systems fail. Look at this documentation. In its original Greek sense, sin means to miss the mark. It describes a structural reality, an error in execution within a system that is already oriented toward a target. This control loop visualizes the definition. The system holds a target reference, produces an output, and compares the result to the initial aim. When the output fails to align with the reference, the resulting variance is the literal definition of sin. It is miscalibration in execution. Redefining repentance focuses on the system's orientation. The Greek term metanoia describes a structural change rather than an emotional reaction to an error. Here, repentance operates as cybernetic recalibration. The system detects the specific architecture of its miss, feeds that data back to the origin, and adjusts its internal orientation so the error does not repeat. Chronic behavioral failure means the system is blind to its own feedback loop. The individual misses the mark indefinitely, unaware of the organization that generates the error. Why do humans continually repeat these misapplications, even when the negative feedback is consciously acknowledged? The persistence of the error stems from the illusion of central command, the belief that a conscious ego sits at the center of the mind, dictating behavior by choice. Ancient Gnostic models mapped this illusion, calling this false central commander the demiurge. This entity claims authorship over a system it did not actually generate. Consider this engine display. In the human brain, neural activity builds and initiates movement before the person reports making a decision. The feeling of choosing appears only after the process becomes visible. The dashboard light turns on after the engine is already running. The ego, acting as the demiurge, interprets this downstream activity. It creates a coherent narrative to explain the action, while the complex engine components are what actually initiate the movement. You cannot force an engine to change its performance by tapping on the dashboard light. Attempting to change behavior through sheer willpower fails because the ego lacks direct causal power over the system's output. Achieving true alignment requires bypassing the illusion of the executive ego. We must observe the distributed network and restructure the underlying conditions generating the output. This analysis of the Gospel of Judas reframes the narrative as an internal dialogue within a single psyche. We are looking at a system becoming visible to itself. In this model, Judas represents a misaligned internal configuration. It is the specific state of the psyche that possesses proximity to the truth and knows what should be done, yet consistently fails to enact it. Jesus represents the aligned configuration, the state where the contradiction is resolved and what is known becomes fully integrated with what is done. The betrayal is a mechanical turning point. It is the point of exposure where the misaligned system can no longer justify its own distortion. The gap between intention and behavior becomes undeniable. As this misalignment is observed by the new aligned orientation, the old Judas configuration loses its authority and collapses. The system preserves the collapsed configuration as an internal reference architecture of verified error. It tracks the exact hesitations and rationalizations that previously derailed it to ensure they are recognized in the future. Knowing the enemy involves intimately mapping your own internal misapplications. You preserve your past distortions as a reference dataset to identify failure as it occurs. We return to the system vector from the beginning, where intentions consistently failed to translate into enacted behavior. Now we place the retained internal archive, the Judas configuration, directly into the path of execution. The system moves toward a familiar context. It approaches the trigger point where it historically substituted rationalization for action. Because the past failure is preserved structurally, the system engages in recursive learning. It pings the internal archive and recognizes the mechanism of the error before the behavior actually executes. The system interrupts itself. It self-corrects based on internal pattern recognition, bypassing the need for conscious, forceful willpower. This recognition-based reorganization replaces the exhausting application of ego-driven control. The system no longer operates blindly within its own constraints, because those constraints are finally visible. This state of alignment is practical wisdom. The individual has transitioned from memorized theory to verified, applied understanding. We outgrow misalignments by integrating the architecture of our failures into our functional wisdom. Coherence is achieved by making the mechanism of the error part of the system's governing structure.